Hello and welcome. In today's podcast, we'll explore the topic value system orientation, a prerequisite for nation building in Nigeria. Building a strong and prosperous nation starts with the values we uphold as individuals and communities. From integrity and accountability to unity and patriotism, these values are the foundation for sustainable development, good governance, and nation building. We'll examine how reorienting our value system can drive positive change and unlock Nigeria's full potential. If you believe in shaping a better future, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated. Don't forget to share to your friends and other persons because nation building is a collective effort that starts with all of us. Let's dive in.
Ever notice how these kind of invisible rules, they shape our lives, like honesty, being respectful? We might not talk about them every day, but they're like the bedrock of how we interact, right? Well, this deep dive takes that idea and it kind of takes it to a whole other level. What if those shared values, what if they were actually the key to a whole nation's success?
That's exactly what makes this paper so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It argues that for Nigeria, a strong shared value system, it isn't just like a nice to have, it's actually like the blueprint for success.
A blueprint. Okay, I like that. So
Well,
instead of just looking at economics or politics, you're saying this paper digs into those underlying values that drive a nation.
Exactly. Think of it this way. You wouldn't build a skyscraper without a really detailed plan, right? I mean, you got to make sure it's stable and strong. Well, this paper is saying that shared values, that's the foundation upon which a really strong and prosperous nation needs to be built on, especially a nation as diverse as Nigeria.
And they're not shying away from that word at all. Diverse. Over 250 ethnic groups, and each with their own rich traditions and perspectives. I can definitely see how that could lead to some serious friction.
Oh, absolutely. And the paper addresses that head on. In fact, it actually states that Nigeria's ethnic diversity, while being a potential source of conflict and disintegration, can actually be transformed into a source of strength and national unity through the development of a strong and widely shared value system. So it's about finding those common threads that can kind of weave a nation together.
Okay, yeah, that's powerful. A source of strength, not just division. But that kind of raises a question then. What is that shared value system? What does that actually look like in practice?
And that's where this paper gets really, really interesting. It dives into the core values that it sees as totally essential for Nigeria to succeed. And it's not just about abstract ideals, no way. It's about how those values actually become real in everyday behavior and governance, even in economic progress.
So it's not just about feeling patriotic. It's about how those values actually play out in daily life. Can you give me an example?
Sure. For example, the paper talks about how important integrity is, and not just in government, but at every level of society.
Yeah.
There's this one quote that really got me thinking. It says, "Integrity is the soul of a nation. Without it, all other virtues are but a facade." And it argues that corruption, which has unfortunately become a really big problem in Nigeria, it directly undermines the nation's progress.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the fish rots from the head down. You know, if there's no integrity at the top, it's going to trickle down and impact every single part of society.
You got it. And the paper doesn't just point out the problem. It digs into the consequences, too. For example, it talks about this study that found that there's a direct link between high levels of corruption and less foreign investment in developing nations. Investors, they don't want to put their money into a system where the rules are always being broken or, bent.
That makes total sense. I mean, trust is essential for anything to grow, right? Whether we're talking about personal relationships or international business.
Exactly. And when you're talking about building a nation, trust, it's absolutely essential.
Okay, so they've laid out this powerful argument for why shared values are important. But what about the current state of affairs in Nigeria? I mean, do these values, do they actually reflect the reality on the ground, or is there a disconnect?
And that's where we move from, what should be to what actually is. And it's a really critical part of this deep dive.
So this paper, it doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, does it? It actually uses some pretty strong words like crisis and even erosion when they're describing the state of values in Nigeria today. I mean, that sounds pretty intense.
Well, it is intense. And yeah, rightfully so. That whole blueprint idea we were talking about earlier? Well, this is where the paper takes a real hard look at Like what happens when nobody follows the plan? And it's not even just about, values being totally absent. It's about how them being gone, how that actually damages Nigeria's progress.
So it's kind of like cracks in the foundation, right? What kind of cracks are we even talking about here, you think?
Well, the paper, it points to a few alarming trends. For example, one that really stood out to me was this whole thing about how corruption is just normal now. It's not really seen as this big problem anymore, but it's almost like an accepted part of life. The paper even quotes this local saying, and it goes, "Man must chop," which basically just means that people, they feel like they got to cut corners just to survive.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty bleak way to look at it. But I guess it does highlight just how deep this whole thing goes, right? It's not just like a few bad people. It's like the whole system.
Exactly. And this paper is not letting anyone off easy, that's for sure. It talks about how this whole culture of corruption, how it affects everything from basic services to whether people even trust the government and stuff. It even says that it makes other countries not want to help out with aid or investment because they're worried that their money will be misused.
Oh, totally. Makes sense. So what you're saying is this whole erosion of values thing, it has some real world consequences. Like it's not just about morality or anything.
Yeah. And then it creates this whole vicious cycle thing, too. The paper talks about how it makes people, especially young people, feel cynical and just not care anymore. When they see dishonesty being rewarded, it makes it really hard for them to believe in a better future.
Yeah, totally. I get that. It's like if you don't even believe in the system, then why would you even try to uphold it? It'd be like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the paper, it takes this kind of turn.
Yeah.
Because even though it's painting a pretty gloomy picture of the way things are right now, it doesn't totally leave you feeling hopeless. It does offer a way forward.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom then. Tell me more. What does this way forward look like? Give me some hope here.
Okay, well, the paper argues that even though, yeah, the challenges are really hard, they're not impossible to overcome, it lays out this kind of multi-pronged approach, and it really stresses that it's not all on the government to fix this. It says it's a shared responsibility.
Oh, I love that. So it's about individual citizens taking action too, right? It makes me think about that saying be the change you want to see in the world.
Yes, exactly. And then the paper, it gives these solid examples of what that kind of change could actually look like. For example, it talks all about the role of education in teaching kids strong morals, for the next generation. It even talks about putting ethics into the school curriculum from when kids are really young.
That's a really cool idea. The stuff we learn when we're kids really does shape how we see the world, doesn't it? But it can't just be about kids, can it? I mean, adults need a reality check too, don't you think?
You're totally right. In the paper, it talks about how crucial leadership is too. And I don't just mean politicians. I mean leaders in every part of life, business, community groups, churches, all that. They set the example for everyone else. It's all about actions, not just words.
So true. People need someone they can actually look up to, people who really live those values. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk, right? But what about the media? They've got to play a huge role in all of this, especially these days.
You hit the nail on the head. The paper, it actually has this whole section on how the media can either make the problem way worse or they can be a huge help in making positive change. It argues that instead of just focusing on crazy news and all the bad stuff, they could highlight stories about integrity and people being resilient and communities coming together, all that.
Yeah, it's like shining a light on the good stuff. People need to see that positive change is even possible and that what they do can actually make a difference.
Exactly. It even suggests that the media could team up with NGOs and stuff to promote ethical behavior and get people more involved in their communities. Think about how big of an impact that could have.
Now, that is an inspiring thought. It feels like we've come a long way from, oh, this is awful, to, okay, this is what we can actually do. It's actually pretty empowering when you think about it like that.
Yeah, no kidding. It's really easy to get kind of overwhelmed by how big these challenges really are. But what I like about this paper is that it doesn't just, point fingers at everybody. It actually offers a plan for change, and not even just for Nigeria. It got me thinking about my own community and the values that, we think are important here. And I thought that was really interesting too. It's the paper's main message. It's goes way beyond just one country. It's a good reminder that building a better future, it doesn't matter if it's for a whole country or just your town, it all starts with agreeing on some core values, stuff like integrity, being accountable, taking responsibility. It really does begin with each of us.
100%. And speaking of starting somewhere, this paper doesn't just give us like a list of chores, It ends on this really interesting question. It asks, if you were going to create the perfect set of values for Nigeria, like what would be the most important one to build on? Wow, now that's something to think about.
It really makes you think, right? Because you have to take all these like complicated issues and you got to boil them down to the core. You got to ask yourself what is so important, so essential that everything else kind of depends on it. It's almost like asking, like, what's the soul of a nation?
Ooh, that's good. The soul of a nation. I like that. It makes you think about what we're really leaving behind for, future generations and all that. And it's not just some like theoretical thing either, is it? It's like the answer to that question could actually make a real difference.
Absolutely. It can get
Right.
people talking,
Mhm.
get them thinking about their priorities,
Mm.
maybe even help bridge some of those divides we were talking about before. And when you really think about it, that's what this whole deep dive has been about this whole time, understanding how important shared values are when you're trying to like shape a nation's future.
This paper has really given me a lot to like unpack. It's really cool how something meant for like academics and stuff can still really connect with everyday people like me.
It just shows you how powerful ideas can be, right? And hey, remember, this is just one perspective, one piece of a much bigger conversation. I mean, keep searching. Look for different voices, different points of view on this whole thing, because it's complicated and it's always changing.
Absolutely. Think of this deep dive as like a starting point,
Yeah.
And hey, maybe you'll be the one to find the missing piece of the puzzle. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for joining this important conversation about value system orientation as a prerequisite for nation building in Nigeria. If you believe that building a better Nigeria starts with the values we live by, help spread the message. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay informed about future discussions. Together, we can inspire change. Share this discourse with friends, family, and your network to keep the conversation going. Let's make this message go viral, because nation building is a journey we must all take together. Meanwhile, feel free to suggest a topic for discussion in our next podcast at the comments section. See you in the next video or podcast.